Hello, welcome to Paleo Greenbird. I am Greenbird. Thank you for watching, and today's video is going to be a video on perishable skills, our ego, and I'll give you an embarrassing story about myself at the end. So, we are going to be talking about ego, but if you're looking for something, hippy-dippy, philosophical, this isn't going to be that video, so I don't want to waste your time. You can click on to the next one, but ego does play a big role in all of our life, really, but especially in some of our primitive skills and our primitive living training and practices that we do. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, what do I mean by a perishable skill? So anything we learn, whether it be bow drill, hand drill, flint and steel, navigating by the sun, navigating by the moon, building a shelter, everything is perishable. Well, let's even relate it back to our everyday life. Things like, carpentry, building things, gardening, whatever it is that you're into, everything is a perishable skill. If you do not practice it, it will disappear, or it'll be fatally flawed. And that's really what I want to talk about, is when something is not 100% diminished, but fatally flawed. Because in the world that probably you and I live in, where we're practicing primitive living skills, survival skills, things of that nature, something that's fatally flawed could cost us our lives, or other people's lives. So that's really what I wanted to talk about this video. So we're going to talk about how skills are perishable, our ego. There's two types of ego, and we'll talk about that, and then I promise you I'll give you an embarrassing story about myself at the end. So first of all, I want to talk about ego, and this is not excuse me, anything scientific. So if you're a psychologist or whatever it is, you want to light me up in the comments, that's fine. But in my world, there are two types of ego. There is passive ego and there's active ego. So let's talk a little bit about what each is. So we'll start with active ego. So active ego would be, let's say, you're lighting a fire. Okay, you've lit 8,942 fires, and you're lighting a fire, and the person that's with you says, hey, why don't you put these sticks pointing in this direction? The smoke will go in another way instead of in your face. And your natural reaction is, I've lit so many fires in my life, I'm going to do this my way. That's your ego. That's your active ego. Or perhaps you are doing something different. Maybe you're maybe you're flint napping. I'm trying to keep this within the realm of myself. I know that it might not be all inclusive, but when someone says, hey, why don't you hold the rock a different way, your first instinct is to be, like, I've done this a lot, I know what I'm doing, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not listening to that person. So that's active ego. That's something that we can kind of address ourselves. Whenever we have that thought and we have those feelings, we have the ability to self-diagnose and be like, okay, well, my ego is getting in my way. I need to check that ego and take advantage of the experience and the knowledge that I might learn something new, even if it's something you feel 100% competent at. And that bleeds into the rest of our lives too. I mean, we all have ego in our jobs, when we're doing something and somebody always wants to tell us to do it a different way, but it can be very self-destructive. So that's active ego. But I want to talk about passive ego. Passive ego is something that's much, much more difficult to identify. For example, passive ego would be, let's say, I'll use the example of bow drill, because that's an easy one. So I spend all summer learning bow drill. I do it for a year and a half, and I'm like, I can get a fire in 45 seconds. I know how to notch. I know what kind of wood to look for. I'm good to go. Well, now you don't practice that skill for, let's say, a winter or longer, and next time you try it, you notice, oh, you know what? I didn't carve my notch, the V in my notch deep enough, and you know what? My notch was my burn hole was a little bit too far away from the edge of the board, and you notice all these fatal flaws. Same thing with archery. For those of us that enjoy the sport of archery. And if you don't, I strongly recommend that you pick it up in some capacity. What happens in the summer after a long winter when we launch that first arrow? You know, we're shaking off a ton of rust. And luckily, we don't eat cardboard or styrofoam, so it doesn't matter if that target gets away. But imagine if you were in a situation where, you know, maybe you needed to make that shot. You know, maybe you've never shot an arrow in the wintertime, with snow coming down. How would that affect your performance? All those things. That's passive ego. Passive ego is when we feel like we've learned a skill and we move on to learn another skill and we never practice that skill again. Or we practice it, you know, I don't want to say irresponsibly, but not as much as we should. And at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about a few ways that we can try and overcome this passive ego. So, you know, that's something that has become really apparent to me, these perishable skills, and I'll tell you why at the end. So we have active ego, which is the ego that we can recognize. It's sort of our pride, I guess. We have passive ego, which is something that's much more difficult to identify. That is when we feel like we've made an accomplishment, we've, you know, chalked that up to success, and we move on to the next one, but we never really, you know, fully develop that skill. We don't continue to practice it, and that can be very, very dangerous. The one time you need a bow drill fire and you're in the woods, maybe you're lost or you went off the road or whatever it is, if you can't perform that task, then all the successes that you had in the past mean absolutely nothing. Nothing. Because you need that fire right then, on the spot. You cannot afford to have mistakes. You can't afford to have, you know, tiny little fatal flaws, fatal errors, because you may only get one or two shots in that situation. So anyway, I don't want to get too deep on that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tips, some of the things that I think can help me, and I'll tell you why, because I experienced this myself and it really brought it close to home. And it's kind of embarrassing, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. So let's talk about some tips that we can do. So in everyday life, there's always something that we can be practicing if we're aware and we're in tune with what's around us. So maybe you're driving down the road. Why don't you take a look outside and see what you see for trees, what you see for plants. Maybe take a look at the sun and say, okay, well, it's, you know, 2 o'clock. The sun is in a particular position. Where do I think north is? Just kind of task yourself on a daily basis. Things of that nature. You're walking from a job site to another job site. Take a look at the ground for 35 seconds and say, what do I see that's edible? You know, things like that. Anything you can to just kind of keep yourself in the game, because it doesn't take a lot of continuous practice to keep yourself tuned up. It's just a whole lot of doing other things and not focusing on, or not revisiting some of the things that you've learned in the past that will create those fatal flaws when the time comes. So again, things like at nighttime, take a look at the moon, see what the moon looks like. What shape is the moon? Where is the sun shining on the moon? What does that tell you about what direction you're facing, or what direction any direction is? I mean, you know the phases of the moon, you know where the sun is, you know that when you see the moon, it's somewhat west, but it's only completely west when it's a full moon. So if it's a half moon or, you know, a partial moon, where is that sun coming from? What direction are you looking? You just kind of keep that stuff in mind, so that when you do need those skills, they're still second nature. Because let's face it, we're all learning new skills. It's hard to continue to practice everything that you learn, but if you don't, it's like anything else. It's perishable. It will disappear. It will deteriorate, and it will not serve you when it's needed. So enough of that. Enough of ranting. I'm not good at these videos. I'm not a ranter. This is just something for myself and others that may think the same way. If you've watched my videos, you know that my channel is not a how-to or this is how you do it. This is sharing my journey, my experience, and I reflect back on these videos, and I hope that my family will as well, if I'm ever not around to pass these skills down. So let's talk about the embarrassing story. So this is kind of interesting because this embarrassing story will address active ego. My active ego does not want to share this story because it's embarrassing, and you know, so, but I'm going to share it anyway. So I've made sundials, solar clocks for, I don't know, since I was a kid. I've always done it. And it's really easy. It's nothing difficult. You just have to have your measurements right. You have to know where north is. But I haven't used them in quite some time because I've been doing some other things. It's been years. And so I made these solar clocks because you know, I just wanted to have a few on hand, and I wanted to have some as like some training tools and things like that. And I couldn't figure it out. Every single time I dialed up this sundial, no pun intended, it was always an hour off. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing wrong? So I'm checking my measurements. My measurements are right. Checking my compass, north and south is right. I was using an app on my phone, so I was like, okay, well, get rid of the app. Let's use a real compass and see. And you know, I did actually notice that tuned it up a little bit, which is good to know if you're using apps on your compass. But still, so I went from solar north to magnetic north, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, what's going on? And so I was baffled. I'm like, I'm an hour off. What is the problem? So I posted it on one of the Facebook sites that I'm part of, and I was like, guys, I need some help. What am I doing? And I've got some sort of a brain fart going on. And somebody pointed out the obvious, and you're probably already typing it in as we speak. And you know, it's August. It's early August or mid-August at this point. It's daylight savings time. So we're back an hour. So that's exactly what my issue was, is that I wasn't accounting for the daylight savings time. You know, you spring ahead, so you always go up an hour. So that's a perfect example of, if you don't practice these skills. Now, if I had been practicing that skill on a, you know, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever it is, that would have been top of mind. I would have known right away, daylight savings time, add an hour. But I hadn't been. And luckily, this wasn't a situation where I was trying to navigate myself out of the woods and find, you know, where I knew there were people or where I knew there was civilization, because that could have taken me. I mean, when you take an angle and you drive it out by a large distance, that's a huge variance. That could have been the difference between missing an entire town, entire city, entire camp, whatever it is. So that really drove home to me that you know, you really need to be aware of your skill set and practice them, because if your passive ego gets too confident that, you know, you've got this skill, you've acquired the skill, I can make a fire with bow drill, hand drill, I can navigate with the sun, I can navigate with the moon, but you don't practice that on a daily basis, guess what? When the time comes, it won't happen, especially when you're under stress and you're not thinking properly and you're scared. It's just not going to happen, guys. So my advice is, and I'm going to bring it back to an old guitar teacher that I had. I played guitar for a bunch of years, and I play just as good now as when I started. And his advice was, you know, when I was first started, I was like, oh yeah, I played an hour last night, I played an hour the night before, you know, I've got this. And he just kind of looked at me like, what the heck are you doing? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm practicing. I thought you'd be proud. So his whole spiel was, don't practice an hour a day. You practice an hour a day, guess what? You're going to get burnt out. You're going to stop practicing, which is what happens to a lot of us. We'll flint nap for 3 hours a day for 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden we're like, I'm just so burnt out. You know, we'll practice whatever it is that we do. And he told me 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day, every day. And I was like, 10 minutes? What am I going to learn in 10 minutes? And you know, he said, you're going to learn more in 10 minutes a day than you will an hour a week, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week. So he was right, and I did learn more. So my point is exactly the same. Don't worry about spending an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you know, perfecting the grip, as they say, as the sports people say. Worry about every single moment that you have to implement, I don't even want to say practice, but implement what you've learned. You know, so if you're walking through a parking lot, look and see if you can see any edibles on the ground. You know, if you're watching your favorite TV show, you know, pull out your hand drill or your bow drill and just do some burn-ins. You don't even have to make a coal. You don't even have to, you know, do whatever. Maybe the next day you take that same burn-in that you had, you carve in your V-notch, and then maybe then you make a coal. You're not doing it all at once. You're just kind of, you know, burning those that I don't like the word muscle memory because it's actually factually incorrect, but you're burning those synaptic nerve connections to remember what it is that you're supposed to do to be successful at any of those given things. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm tasking myself to do, is to spend more time focusing on what's important to me, which is primitive living skills, and being able to you know, get the results that I want and produce the, I don't even know how to say it. I'm at a loss of words, but you know what I mean. So I want to practice my primitive skills. I want to be able to know that if I need them at any given time, that they are going to be sharp, they're going to be practiced to the best of my ability, and I'm not going to have a lot of clutter of you know, uncertainty. And that's what I would suggest you all do. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, sort of a rant. Again, I make these videos not just for my channel, but for myself and for my family and for those that care about what I do. And so I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, please share, please subscribe. I hope you're having an awesome day. I truly do. And until next time, this is Paleo Greenbird. I am signing out.